Hello, a warm welcome to all of you. My name is Justin. Welcome to 6 Minutes a Day, a journey to your higher self, part of the Strength, Yoga, and Freedom community. Whether you're listening to this on a podcast, you're watching it on YouTube, this training program is all about ways to re-examine, maybe even rebuild certain areas of your life, maybe your whole life, with just practical tips and tools to use in that everyday life. We use yoga off the mat on this channel to really propel ourselves into a higher self. So in the first half of this training program, we're coming to the end of, this is day 14. We have tomorrow left, and then we're going to be going into the second half of our 30 days next week. But before we get there, we have a couple things to finish up and wrap up in these next 2 days. And today we're going to be talking about the ethical practice of yoga and nonviolence. And that ties into what we just talked about in days 11, 12, and 13, which were all about identifying what anxiety is going on in our lives and some of the things that trigger anxiety. That physical anxiety being that physical response in your body that starts to make changes in your body that don't feel comfortable. And so fear is out there with that. We talked about how overwhelming feelings can interrupt that, feelings of dread. So review all the trainings from before. Remember, you can back up and listen to them or watch them at your own leisure and at your own pace. Today, we're going to be talking about the ethical practice of yoga and nonviolence. So I want to say this. I'm not talking specifically about violence in a physical way. Of course, that is part of it. But I'm talking about the violence that we actually have in our minds, all that nonsense that we tell ourselves, because we're triggered by certain things that go on in our lives, and we start to run into these loops. Remember the habit loops? We talked about habits recently. And so we're really coming into busting through some of those habits that we have in our lives and creating more nonviolence, so in our own minds as well. So let's get right into it. Our daily mental state, this is important, is a reflection of all of the physical and the mental practices that you have built into your daily life, that we've all built into our daily lives. That's where our daily mental state comes from. If you wake up in the morning and you sludge your way out of bed and move through the morning with no intention, just being so negative about how your life is going or how the day is already starting, you're setting your mind, you're telling your mind by doing that you're going to have a bad day. So that's just one example of sometimes setting yourself up in a mental state that may not be the mental state that you're looking for. So it's important to actually recognize where you are, as we've done in this program, and create healthy shifts. That's why what I mean about creating physical and mental practices that allow you, when you build them into your daily life, to move forward, even with the anxiety, working with it to overcome it instead of ignoring it and pushing it off to the side. Practicing yoga on the mat is known as asana. Those are the physical poses. And then the breath work, pranayama, so you connect your breath with your movement. One of the ways to practice yoga off the mat in nonviolence, literally translated into nonviolence, is one of the yamas, which is ahimsa. Now, yamas are translated to restraints. So they're one of the 8 limbs of yoga. And when we practice nonviolence, we restrain from violence. So if you are struggling with something, and this is going to become very, very, very clear as we move into tomorrow's training, and then we start talking about dealing with other people through the rest of our training, rest of our program, this is going to become very important for you, because how you act and how you behave is a reflection of yourself. It is how much you are in tune or loving yourself. Fear, worrying, and all those things that lead to, all the triggers that lead to anxiety can also lead to violence, like control, like having possessiveness, like hoarding things, like having greed. All of those things are stemming from that trigger. And it causes the anxiety to bubble, and it causes us to want to make decisions that move us into those violent decisions, like controlling things, being possessive about things, trying to, instead of flowing, trying to control all the outcomes. We talked about all of this as well, and it links itself right into Ahimsa, nonviolence. The opposite of control and the opposite of violence is courage, because courage restores balance. Because courage taps into your inner voice. You're not going to get courage from anything that's made up. You have to flow with courage. You have to physically feel the courage bubble up and perform the action, much like you do if you feel the anxiety bubble up and you perform an action. Balance leads to nonviolence. Courage restores the balance, which leads to nonviolence. That's why when you create a morning routine or an evening routine or ways to deal with people who may be testing you or may be crossing your boundary lines, when you handle that with balance, that's how you create nonviolence. When you handle it with anxiety, that's when the disharmony shows up. So oftentimes we know that feeling powerless invites violence. But when you actually question and you stop for a moment and you think to yourself, why do I feel like I'm powerless or I have no control? When you question and feel that feeling through, you are actually creating balance, because that courage, that self-awareness that you're starting to cultivate is going to showcase as you operate yourself through your day-to-day tasks and life. Courage and balance pushes through the feelings of anxiety, and it pushes you to move that sense of wanting to always have control up and out. It's important to feel it. Self-love is the way you treat others. The way you feel about yourself is exactly how you treat others. And when we feel like our lives are a mess, we sometimes look outward to try to help everybody else's life. Now, that does not create balance. You trying to solve everyone else's problems or change someone else creates horrible imbalance in your own life, because now you're focused on someone else's life and not yours. And so all that fear and all that worrying and all those things that trigger your anxiety just keep going and going and going if you're not creating those healthy routines and habits, focusing on recognizing what's happening in your body and then trying to control everybody else. When all those things happen, your mind just continues to move in those loops. When you put yourself into situations where you are able to recognize what's going on and create balance, that's when it all opens up for you. Wrapping this up, think about how you have worked on the areas in your life in the first 13 days of the training, now with today being day 14. So think about that. We are not focusing on how to help others. We have not had one training in here that is titled How to Help Other People. That's not what we're focusing on here. We are focusing on how we can step into our own lives to make positive, small, daily changes. Helping or stepping into someone's life by helping them is different than supporting them. Self-love is a basis for nonviolence and feeling complete, because yoga is not a competition. If you're trying to fix someone else's life and you're stepping into that, there's competition in there, because you're trying to raise someone else's life to your standard. And so you're competing against that. That's not for you to compete. Yoga's not a competition. So think about how you've worked on areas of your life. You are working on them for yourself. You're the one that has to spend 24 hours a day with yourself. So it's very important. Your emotions do not belong to anyone else. Of course, talking about emotions with a very close, trusted circle of people is very healthy, or a medical professional. Of course, that's very healthy. But as we move into our final day of this week tomorrow, we're going to talk about how all of this comes together, managing the emotion, having the nonviolence within you, so that when you get ready to interact with other people, you can do so in a loving, healthy, and most importantly, happy and fulfilled way. So we're gonna get to that in day 15, which is coming up next. I wanna thank each and every one of you for being here. We'll see you on the next one.